The woman crowned as the face of a nation did not vanish into mystery. She was found brutally murdered, and the truth behind her death refused to stay buried. For a long time, the case appeared straightforward. Evidence aligned, timelines matched. Investigators believed they were only steps away from closure. The public was told the answers were coming. But in this case, certainty would not last. What happens when a murder that looks solved suddenly begins to unravel? Not because of rumor, but because of one overlooked detail that changes everything. A crown resting under bright lights. Flashbulbs exploding. Applause filling the room. And somewhere beneath that image, a story no one was prepared to hear. And from the very beginning, it is important to understand this is not just a story about fame. It is a story about how certainty collapses. At first, investigators believed the case followed a clear path. Statements seemed consistent. Physical evidence appeared to point in one direction. Media coverage quickly echoed the same conclusion. The narrative was forming, solid and confident. Then, just as the case appeared close to being solved, everything shifted. Blue Square, a single discovery surfaced, and it did not fit. Not with the timeline, not with the official version, not with what the public had already been told. That moment marked the beginning of doubt. Why was this detail not addressed earlier? Why did it surface only when the investigation was nearly complete? And most importantly, who benefited from it being ignored? Blue Square, this new clue, did not answer questions. It created them. It forced investigators to revisit assumptions they thought were settled. It reopened discussions that had already been closed. And it placed certain individuals back into focus when they were no longer supposed to be there. As documents were re-examined and timelines reassembled, the case no longer felt stable. What once looked like resolution now felt premature. What once felt certain now demanded scrutiny. Blue Square, the investigation, did not collapse. It fractured, and inside those fractures were contradictions, silences, and gaps no one could explain. This documentary follows that shift, from confidence to confusion, from answers to uncertainty. It examines what changed, why it mattered, and how one unexpected clue reshaped the entire direction of the case. Because in the Miss Switzerland murder case, the most disturbing truth was not how it began, but how close it came to ending before everything went wrong. On February 13th, 2024, concern arose when Kristina Joksimovic did not arrive to collect her children from kindergarten, an action that departed from established daily routine and prompted contact with her family. According to public reporting and official statements, Kristina's father traveled to the family residence in Switzerland after being notified of her absence. The home was shared by Kristina Joksimovic, a 38-year-old former Miss Switzerland finalist and pageant title holder, and her husband, identified in Swiss court documents only as Thomas, in accordance with Swiss privacy law. Upon arrival, Kristina's husband stated that he did not know where she was and offered no explanation for her absence. While inside the residence and before law enforcement had been contacted, Kristina's father searched the property independently. Investigative records later described his movement through the house as methodical, driven by concern rather than instruction. In the basement laundry room, a space characterized in subsequent filings as isolated and bunker-like, he observed a large black refuse bag. Visible from the opening of the bag was what appeared to be blonde hair. When the bag was opened, the severed head of Kristina Joksimovic was discovered inside. Police were notified immediately and arrived to secure the scene. The residence was formally designated an active crime scene, and investigators assumed control of all areas of the home, with particular focus on the basement. Kristina's husband was taken into custody for questioning in connection with her death. The discovery shifted the matter from a missing person concern to a homicide investigation within hours. The condition of the remains, as documented in early investigative summaries, indicated that significant post-mortem alteration had occurred, complicating immediate determinations regarding cause and manner of death. Additional remains were subsequently located within the residence, though their state limited initial forensic assessment. Authorities noted that extensive pathology and toxicology examinations would be required before formal conclusions could be reached. From the outset, investigators recorded that the circumstances of discovery were atypical, including the involvement of a parent as the individual who located the remains. This fact, combined with a domestic setting and the absence of an initial emergency report, established a complex investigative framework that would require prolonged examination and careful evidentiary handling. In the hours following the discovery, investigators began assembling an initial narrative based on preliminary statements and observable circumstances. According to public reporting and official summaries, Kristina Joksimovic husband stated that he had no knowledge of her whereabouts prior to her father's arrival at the residence. This account was recorded as part of the initial inquiry and treated as provisional, pending verification through forensic review and corroborating evidence. At that stage, no formal accusation had been made, and investigators focused on establishing basic facts rather than assigning culpability. As questioning continued, the narrative presented by the husband evolved. He later asserted that an altercation had occurred inside the home and that Kristina Joksimovic had attacked him with a knife, resulting in her death during what he described as an act of self-defense. This revised statement represented a significant departure from his earlier claim of ignorance regarding her disappearance. Investigators documented the change carefully, noting the timing and context in which the new explanation was offered. Under Swiss legal standards, claims of self-defense require consistency and independent evidentiary support, neither of which had yet been established. Law enforcement officials compared the shifting statements against the physical condition of the scene and the known circumstances of discovery. Early observations did not reveal indications of a struggle consistent with the account provided, though investigators emphasized that initial scene impressions are not determinative. The shared domestic environment introduced additional complexity, as the presence of both parties' DNA and personal effects was expected and not, on its own, probative. As the early narrative circulated through official briefings and media reporting, authorities remained cautious in their language. The evolving account was characterized as unverified and subject to change as forensic results became available. Investigators noted that such narrative shifts are documented for later credibility assessment rather than resolved at the investigative stage. By the end of the initial phase, a provisional framework had formed, a domestic setting, a deceased spouse, and a surviving partner offering inconsistent explanations. However, officials emphasized that this framework was not a conclusion. Establishing a reliable timeline became a central challenge once the investigation shifted from discovery to reconstruction. Kristina Joksimovic failure to collect her children from kindergarten on February 13, 2024, served as the first fixed temporal indicator that something had gone wrong, according to public reporting and investigative summaries. This deviation from routine prompted the initial welfare concern and ultimately led to discovery at the residence. Beyond that point, however, determining the precise sequence of events proved difficult. Investigators attempted to reconstruct the hours preceding and following Kristina Joksimovic's last known expected activity by examining household routines, statements provided by her husband, and available external reference points. No verified sightings of Kristina outside the home were documented after the relevant mourning period. This absence limited the ability to anchor her movements to specific times or locations beyond the residence itself. Authorities noted that in cases involving shared domestic spaces, timelines often rely heavily on corroboration rather than direct observation. The suspect's statements regarding his own movements during the same period introduced further uncertainty. Account provided during early questioning did not initially align with inferred time windows derived from family routines and institutional schedules. While discrepancies were noted, investigators emphasized that inconsistency alone does not establish intent or culpability. Each statement was recorded and preserved for later comparison against physical and digital evidence. Forensic limitations compounded the problem. Due to the condition of the remains and extensive post-mortem alteration, pathologists were unable to determine a precise time of death. Estimates were provided within broad ranges, reflecting acknowledged margins of error. Official forensic statements noted that decomposition and subsequent interference prevented narrowing the window with certainty. As a result, the timeline remained partially constructed rather than complete. Investigators could reasonably exclude the involvement of unknown third parties based on the available information, but they could not definitively sequence the critical events within the home. This unresolved temporal framework would persist throughout the investigation, influencing evidentiary interpretation and reinforcing the need for corroboration beyond chronological inference alone. As the investigation progressed beyond the initial discovery phase, attention increasingly turned to consistency and evolution of statements provided by Kristina Joksimovic husband, according to public reporting and official summaries. His earliest account asserted a lack of knowledge regarding Kristina's whereabouts prior to her father's arrival at the residence. This statement was formally documented during preliminary questioning and treated as a baseline against which later explanations would be measured. At that stage, investigators emphasized fact-gathering rather than confrontation. Subsequent interviews produced a materially different account. The husband stated that an altercation had occurred inside the home and that Kristina Joksimovic had attacked him with a knife, leading to her death in what he characterized as self-defense. Investigators recorded the revised statement in full, noting both its content and the point in the inquiry at which it was introduced. Under Swiss legal standards, self-defense claims require a demonstrable and proportionate response to an immediate threat, supported by physical evidence or corroborating testimony. Law enforcement officials compared the shifting statements against a developing evidentiary record. Early scene observations and preliminary forensic indicators did not immediately substantiate the presence of an active assault by the victim at the time of death. However, investigators cautioned that absence of immediate corroboration does not, in isolation, disprove a claim. The shared domestic setting required careful differentiation between expected environmental traces and indicators of violent struggle. Investigative files reflect that the changes in narrative were preserved without inference regarding motive. Prosecutors later noted that evolving accounts are not uncommon in domestic homicide investigations and are assessed through cumulative analysis rather than isolated contradiction. Each version was retained for later credibility evaluation, particularly in relation to forensic findings and reconstructed timelines. By this stage, the inquiry had not reached a definitive conclusion regarding intent or sequence. The shifting statements did not resolve the case, but instead introduced additional questions that required verification through independent evidence. As a result, investigators deferred judgment, allowing the evidentiary process, rather than testimonial consistency alone, to guide subsequent legal determinations. Following the designation of the residence as an active crime scene, investigators conducted a systematic examination of the interior, with particular focus on the basement laundry room, where the initial discovery had been made. According to official summaries and later court references, this area was physically separated from the main living spaces and described as enclosed and isolated, a characteristic that affected both sound transmission and visibility within the home. The location of the remains in this room immediately elevated its evidentiary significance. Crime scene documentation identified multiple tools within or near the basement area that were later referenced in judicial findings, including a jigsaw, a knife, and garden shears. These items were cataloged and preserved for forensic analysis. Investigators noted that the presence of such tools in a domestic environment is not inherently incriminating. However, their proximity to the remains required further examination. The arrangement of the space suggested post-mortem activity rather than a spontaneous incident, though officials avoided definitive characterization at this stage. Blood traces and biological material were observed within the basement, but their distribution required cautious interpretation. Investigators emphasized that domestic settings often contain overlapping traces from routine activity, complicating efforts to distinguish between background presence and evidence directly related to a criminal act. The condition of the remains indicated significant post-mortem alteration, limiting the ability to reconstruct precise movements or sequences within the room. The remainder of the residence was examined to determine whether indicators of violence extended beyond the basement. No immediate signs of forced entry were documented, and no disturbance consistent with a prolonged struggle was conclusively identified in the primary living areas. These observations were recorded as neutral findings rather than exculpatory or inculpatory conclusions. Investigators also documented the absence of an initial emergency report originating from within the home. This procedural detail was noted without inference, as timing and reporting behavior can vary widely in domestic incidents. By the conclusion of the scene examination, authorities characterized the residence as evidentially complex, requiring integration of physical findings with forensic analysis and testimonial review rather than reliance on scene appearance alone. As forensic examination progressed, expectations that pathology alone would resolve critical questions were gradually tempered by the condition of the remains and the extent of post-mortem alteration, according to court rulings and official statements. The autopsy confirmed that Kristina Joksimovic had been strangled prior to dismemberment. This finding established a homicidal mechanism of death, but did not, on its own, clarify the precise sequence of events or the duration between death and subsequent actions. Forensic specialists emphasized that while strangulation was identified, determining the exact circumstances under which it occurred was constrained by evidentiary limitations. The dismemberment and alteration of the body significantly complicated analysis. Investigative summaries noted that several tissue samples were degraded, limiting their diagnostic value. In certain areas, samples yielded only partial biological markers, insufficient to establish unique matches or to reconstruct definitive timelines. Forensic services explicitly stated that contamination risk could not be excluded, given the domestic environment and the extended interval before recovery. As a result, conclusions were framed cautiously and qualified in formal reporting. Toxicology analysis further extended the investigative process. Officials indicated that comprehensive testing was required to assess the presence or absence of substances that might bear on cause of death or impairment. These analyses were time-consuming and did not produce findings that materially altered the court determination of strangulation. However, they underscore the complexity of the case and the necessity of avoiding premature conclusions. Despite public expectations that forensic science would deliver clarity, authorities consistently noted that the evidentiary threshold for certain determinations was not met. The inability to precisely establish time of death, sequence of actions, or contributing factors limited the role of forensic evidence as a standalone determinant. Instead, it functioned as one component within a broader evidentiary matrix. By the conclusion of this phase, investigators acknowledged that forensic findings supported aspects of the prosecution theory, but did not resolve all contested issues. The case would therefore depend on the cumulative assessment of physical evidence, statements, and reconstructed timelines rather than definitive scientific proof alone. With limitations evident in physical and forensic evidence, investigators expanded their focus to digital material in an effort to supplement the developing evidentiary record. According to court documents and public reporting, electronic devices associated with the household were examined to establish presence, activity, and temporal context surrounding the events of February 13, 2024. This review included mobile phone usage data and application activity, analyzed in conjunction with known routines and reconstructed timelines. Digital analysis confirmed that the suspect's device was active within the residence during the relevant period. Investigators noted that such data corroborated physical presence but did not, in itself, establish intent or sequence. Of particular significance in later court findings was documentation indicating that online video content was accessed on a mobile device during the period in which post-mortem activity was alleged to have occurred. This information was recorded as contextual rather than determinative, providing behavioral reference rather than direct proof of causation. Authorities emphasize that digital traces must be interpreted cautiously. Application logs and usage timestamps can demonstrate activity, but do not inherently reflect the purpose or circumstances under which a device was used. Additionally, investigators acknowledge that device interaction could occur automatically or without continuous engagement, requiring careful differentiation between active use and passive operation. No evidence was identified indicating external communication or coordination with third parties during the relevant time frame. Call logs, messaging records, and internet activity did not reveal contact suggesting the involvement of another individual. This absence was noted as consistent with the working theory of an incident confined to the domestic environment, though investigators avoided characterizing it as conclusive. Digital data was also evaluated for its contribution to timeline reconstruction. While device usage provided reference points, it did not resolve broader temporal uncertainty created by forensic limitations. Officials described the digital review as corroborative rather than clarifying, reinforcing certain aspects of presence and isolation without answering all outstanding questions. By the end of this phase, investigators concluded that digital traces supported the broader evidentiary framework, but did not independently resolve the case. Instead, they functioned as supplementary material, to be weighed alongside physical findings and testimonial evidence during subsequent legal proceedings. As the investigation advanced and evidentiary review continued, law enforcement formally narrowed its focus to Kristina Joksimovic husband. This shift did not occur abruptly, but followed a cumulative assessment of available information, including the domestic context, reconstructed timelines, and the absence of credible indicators pointing to third-party involvement. Investigators emphasized in official summaries that such focus reflected standard investigative procedure rather than a predetermined conclusion. The shared residence placed the husband in proximity to the victim during the relevant period, a factor routinely considered in domestic homicide inquiries. Statements provided by the suspect, which had evolved over time, were preserved for comparison against forensic and digital findings. While inconsistency alone was not treated as proof of culpability, it contributed to the decision to prioritize further examination of his actions and explanations. Authorities noted that no verified alibi placing him outside the home during the critical window had been established. Investigators also considered the lack of forced entry or disturbance, suggesting intrusion by an unknown party. Environmental assessments supported the inference that the events leading to Kristina Joksimovic's death occurred within the home. Digital review did not reveal external communications indicating coordination with others. These factors collectively reduced the plausibility of alternative suspects without eliminating the need for continued verification. The suspect was taken into custody shortly after discovery, initially for questioning, and remained under investigation as forensic and psychiatric assessments were conducted. Prosecutors later indicated that prolonged detention reflected the gravity of the allegations and the need to preserve the integrity of the inquiry rather than an early determination of guilt. At this stage, investigative focus was characterized as evidentiary concentration rather than formal accusation. Authorities reiterated that the designation of primary suspect is a procedural step, subject to revision should new evidence emerge. Nevertheless, by this point in the inquiry, the direction of the investigation had become clear, centered on the individual most closely connected to both the victim and the circumstances of her death. As the investigation progressed and its focus narrowed, certain potential evidentiary avenues were documented as explored only to a limited extent or deprioritized altogether, according to official summaries and public reporting. This narrowing reflected an assessment of relevance rather than a determination of insignificance. Investigators noted that in complex domestic homicide cases, the scope of inquiry is continuously refined as findings accumulate and probabilities shift. Broader social and professional inquiries into Kristina Joksimovic's life outside the home were conducted at a preliminary level. No information emerged indicating threats, disputes, or associations that would suggest involvement by an external party. As a result, these lines of inquiry were not expanded further. Authorities emphasized that the absence of indicators, rather than investigative oversight, guided this decision. Similarly, no credible reports of suspicious activity in the vicinity of the residence during the relevant time frame were substantiated through canvassing or review. Certain forensic possibilities were also constrained by practical limitations. The condition of the remains restricted the utility of additional comparative testing beyond what had already been conducted. Investigative records indicate that further sampling was considered unlikely to yield probative results, given degradation and contamination risk already identified by forensic services. As such, extended testing beyond established protocols was not pursued. Digital inquiries beyond household devices were likewise limited. With no evidence of external communication, coordination, or travel, authorities did not expand the digital scope to peripheral contacts or unrelated networks. This decision was framed as proportional to the evidentiary yield rather than exhaustive omission. Investigators documented these boundaries explicitly, acknowledging that every investigation involves choices regarding allocation of time and resources. The absence of pursued evidence did not imply concealment or disregard, but reflected a judgment that additional inquiry would not materially alter the evidentiary picture as it stood. Nevertheless, these documented limits would later contribute to public discussion, as unresolved questions often persist in cases where conclusions are drawn from cumulative inference rather than singular, definitive proof. On December 10, 2024, the public prosecutor's office announced that it had concluded the formal investigation into the death of Kristina Joksimovic and had filed criminal charges against her husband. According to official statements and court filings, the charges included murder and disturbing the peace of the dead, reflecting both the alleged cause of death and the subsequent handling of the remains. This announcement followed nearly 10 months of investigative activity, during which forensic analysis, witness interviews, and evidentiary review were conducted. Prosecutors stated that the decision to bring charges was based on the cumulative weight of the evidence rather than any single determinative finding. The confirmed cause of death, identified as strangulation prior to dismemberment, formed a central element of the prosecution's theory. Additional factors cited included the domestic setting, the reconstructed timeline, excluding third-party involvement, and the absence of corroboration for the suspect's self-defense claim. Authorities emphasized that the evidentiary threshold required for indictment had been met, while acknowledging that ultimate determination would rest with the court. Court documents reference the manner in which the remains were altered after death, framing this conduct as legally significant and distinct from the act of killing itself. The charge of disturbing the peace of the dead addressed this aspect separately, consistent with Swiss criminal statutes. Prosecutors avoided detailed commentary on motive, noting that motive is not a required element for charging under applicable law. Officials also addressed the duration of the investigation, citing the complexity of forensic examinations and the necessity of comprehensive review before formal action. The extended timeline was characterized as procedural rather than exceptional, particularly given the condition of the remains and the need for toxicological and pathological confirmation. While the announcement marked a procedural milestone, authorities stressed that it did not constitute a verdict. The accused was formally charged but remained entitled to presumption of innocence. With the filing of charges, the case transitioned from investigative phase to judicial process, moving toward adjudication while remaining subject to evidentiary challenge and legal scrutiny. Following the announcement of formal charges, public attention to the case intensified, accompanied by increasing scrutiny of the investigation and its conclusions. Media reporting, drawing on court filings and official statements, revisited the timeline, the evolving accounts provided by the accused, and the extended period between arrest and indictment. While prosecutors framed the delay as a function of forensic complexity, public discussion frequently interpreted it as an indication of unresolved uncertainty rather than procedural necessity. Observers questioned whether the evidentiary record, as publicly described, fully accounted for the inconsistencies noted earlier in the inquiry. Particular focus was placed on the changing statements offered by the accused and the absence of independent eyewitness testimony. Commentators emphasized that, in the absence of a complete forensic reconstruction, the case appeared to rely heavily on circumstantial inference. Authorities responded by reiterating that circumstantial evidence, when cumulative and coherent, can meet legal thresholds for prosecution. The role of forensic limitations also became a subject of debate. Public summaries acknowledged that degraded samples and post-mortem alteration restricted the precision of scientific findings. This acknowledgement, while transparent, contributed to skepticism among those who equated forensic uncertainty with evidentiary weakness. Legal analysts noted, however, that such limitations are not uncommon in cases involving extensive interference with remains. Discussion also extended to investigative scope. Questions were raised regarding potential avenues not pursued, including broader social inquiries and alternative scenarios. Officials maintained that these avenues were assessed and deprioritized based on relevance rather than omission. Nonetheless, the perception of constrained inquiry persisted in public discourse. Despite these doubts, no substantive evidence contradicting the prosecution's theory emerged through public reporting. The case thus occupied an ambiguous space, formally advanced yet informally contested. Public doubt did not alter the legal status of proceedings, but it underscored the distinction between procedural sufficiency and public confidence. As the matter moved toward judicial review, uncertainty continued to shape external perception, even as the case advanced within the established legal framework. After the filing of formal charges, the progression of the case entered a period characterized by procedural delay rather than investigative activity. According to public reporting and court records, pre-trial proceedings extended as judicial authorities addressed evidentiary motions, forensic documentation, and assessments related to the accused's mental and physical condition. These steps, while routine and complex homicide cases contributed to a perception that momentum had slowed following the prosecutor's announcement. Judicial filings indicated that additional time was required to review forensic reports in their entirety, including pathology and toxicology documentation that had formed the basis of the charging decision. Although the core findings had already been disclosed, the defense was entitled to examine underlying data and methodologies. This process, governed by procedural safeguards, unfolded over months rather than weeks. Authorities emphasize that such review is integral to ensuring that evidentiary standards are met before trial. Psychiatric and competency evaluations were also referenced in court materials. Given the nature of the allegations and observations cited in judicial assessments, evaluative procedures were undertaken to determine the accused's fitness to participate in proceedings. Officials did not characterize these evaluations as exceptional, but noted that they were necessary to preserve the integrity of the process. No findings from these assessments were publicly released at that stage. During this period, no additional charges were filed, and no substantial new evidence was introduced into the public record. The case remained legally active but procedurally static, advancing through administrative stages rather than substantive hearings. Court calendars reflected adjournments and scheduling conferences rather than evidentiary presentation. As time passed, the absence of visible progress reinforced the sense that the case had entered a holding pattern. While the legal framework continued to operate as designed, the lack of public milestones underscored the distance between formal resolution and final adjudication. The matter remained pending, defined less by new developments than by the structured pace of judicial review. With formal charges filed and the investigative phase concluded, the case of Kristina Joksimovic exists in a state defined more by documentation than by resolution. Prosecutorial filings outline a coherent theory supported by cumulative evidence, including forensic findings, reconstructed timelines, and the absence of credible alternative suspects. On paper, the matter appears procedurally complete, having met the evidentiary threshold required to advance into judicial process. Yet significant limitations remain embedded within the record. Forensic analysis, while establishing strangulation as a cause of death, could not reconstruct every aspect of sequence or timing due to postmortem alteration and sample degradation. Statements central to the case evolved over time, creating a reliance on comparative credibility rather than singular, definitive proof. Digital traces and scene examination reinforced presence and isolation, but did not independently resolve all contested points. As the case advances through judicial review, its status remains unsettled. No verdict has been rendered, and no trial outcome has yet tested the prosecution's conclusions against adversarial scrutiny. The presumption of innocence persists, as required by law, alongside a formal narrative that remains subject to challenge. Without a final adjudication, the case remains unresolved in substantive terms. It is resolved on paper through charges and filings, but the broader questions surrounding sequence, intent, and complete factual clarity persist. In the absence of definitive physical reconstruction or judicial determination, the matter is likely to remain unsettled, defined by probability rather than certainty, and shaped by records rather than closure.